Hi, I'm Keionna Thomas, Program Coordinator for BRAID with the EcoWomanist Institute Southeast, and this is BRAIDEd. In our last episode, we heard from Dr. Catherine Meeks about her watching her father walk the perimeter of their land each morning at sunrise, a ritual of stewardship that connected generations to the earth. Today, we flip that story. What does it look like to be the one receiving that legacy? What happens when a Howard University film graduate inherits 200 years of family land in rural North Carolina? Welcome to BRAIDEd, a podcast from the EcoWomanist Institute Southeast. I'm your host, Keionna Thomas, Program Coordinator for BRAID, our Black Restorative Agriculture Incubation and Development Program. Summer is here, and with it comes the season of growth, abundance, and harvest. It's a time where the earth shows us her fullest capacity, when the long days give us more time to tend to what we're cultivating. We're continuing our conversation about reclaiming agricultural space, but today we're hearing from someone on the receiving end of generational land transfer. Someone who's proving that farming isn't just about dirt under your nails. It's an interdisciplinary field where art, storytelling, and community organizing can flourish. Before we dive in, let's check in with EY's founder, Valerie Hill Rawls, about the narrative of erasure that shapes how we talk about Black farming.
My story doesn't begin or end with loss. Yes, the 98% of land loss is real, but that's not the whole story. My family, descendants of sharecroppers from Mississippi, held on. We kept our connection to the land alive, passing down not just acres, but wisdom, resilience, and hope. This isn't just about farming. It's about healing, reclaiming, and building a future where young people return as inheritors, not refugees. We say restorative agriculture because it's about repair of land, of community, and of legacy. We're not just survivors of loss. We are architects of restoration, growing abundance for our people and our future. This is a story we're braiding together, one of land, legacy, and liberation. When folks talk about Black land in Mississippi, the story too often starts and ends with loss. Back in the day before we fled from the South to the North, we had land. Now we don't have land. That was the refrain that I've heard my whole life. And the 98% of land loss, it's real. It's devastating. But that's not the whole story. It's not the story I'm here to tell. As I shared in the past, my father was the son of a Mississippi sharecropper, and our family's hands have known the soil. And it's heartbreak, yes, but also its promise. We lost land, but we never lost our connection to it. Throughout the South, there are families like mine who held on, who kept land in trust, who maintained relationships with the earth, even when the world tried to sever those ties. When we only tell the story of loss, we participate in our own erasure. I want to make visible the Southern farmer who never left, the families who quietly kept the land for generations, sometimes just a few acres, sometimes a patchwork quilt of a field and forest, of woods. We're still here. And now something beautiful is happening. Young people are coming back, not as refugees from cities, but as inheritors, claiming what's always been theirs, bringing new vision and energy. At EY's, through BRAID, remembering, we're reimagining. We're building a future rooted in restorative agriculture. And yes, I say restorative, not regenerative, for a reason. Regenerative has become a buzzword, commoditized, and co-opted. But restorative agriculture, it is about repair. It's about healing the land and healing ourselves, restoring relationships that were broken but never destroyed. This isn't about food. It's about community and economic development. It's about creating new opportunities and building intergenerational wealth. We're showing what's possible when we remember not just what was taken, but what we've always had: wisdom, grit, and a vision for something greater. We're not just survivors of loss, we're architects of restoration. And we've invited others to join us, to claim their inheritance, and to help write a new story for Black land and Black futures in the South.
Today I'm speaking with Nia Kiara Cole, a fifth-generation farmer originally from Stone Mountain, Georgia, who's currently rebuilding her family farm in High Point, North Carolina. But Nia's path to farming wasn't straightforward. They have a background in film and spent 12 years in D.C. before inheriting their family's land. They also serve as fund manager for the Southern Black Farmers Community-Led Fund. Nia, welcome to BRAIDEd. So let's start with your story. You're a fifth-generation farmer, but you didn't go straight from college to the farm. Can you tell us about that journey?
Thank you for having me. And absolutely. I think coming to the farm was always in the background of my mind because I knew early on that I was going to inherit the house and the land immediately around it. But what that was going to look like, that was the part that wasn't clear. I thought I was going to be a little old person retiring on the farm because that was the visual that I had. My grandfather was born in 1917. So by the time I came around, he was in his 80s and 90s, right? So just considerably older and not able to farm the property. So I pursued art. That was my first love, in addition to being outside. Which tracks as well. My aunt, my father's sister, was a singer. She actually was a background singer for Roberta Flack up until she ended up passing. It was in my DNA and also history of artists on my mom's side. So yeah, I started with drawing and then eventually pursued photography, and that led to film. And that was what I studied when I went to Howard. And so pursued film, had a nice little career working there. A lot of it social justice related in a weird way. I was really close to my maternal grandmother growing up, but she was a social worker. And so that was always something that kind of I wanted to weave in as well. It's like I had this love for the nature and farming, and I was just like in the background. Like, I don't know what to do with that. But art and helping people felt more tangible. So a lot of the folks that I was working with were nonprofits, and a stint at a political ad campaign agency, no conservative partners. I feel like it's important to say that. And yeah, did a random stint at a studio when I was back home in Georgia for a little while. I worked for Street Exec Studios, and so I was working with some of their young artists. And served as a program manager for a nonprofit. So always, again, constantly weaving in between this line between like art and creation and service. And then around the beginning of the pandemic, so 2020, when there no longer were film opportunities, I couldn't work the same way. I was in DC at the time, and I started working for the health department for the COVID-19 team. And so that led to me being a lot more tangible within the world of like food sovereignty, food access. I also had gotten a taste of that for the pandemic. And in 2018, I was doing a master's at Howard. I did a master's in social work. And that again was like giving me language for food deserts and food sovereignty, and being a Black person, and also being a Black person who has family who have been and still live in spaces that would be considered like places that are experiencing food insecurity. I was aware of that, but as a Black kid and a person of color, you don't often get like the tangible words for that and the science behind it and the different things that lead to that happening between like gerrymandering, redlining, all these different things that contribute to the creation of these environments because they're not natural. And so around the pandemic, once I also had the data around how that then impacted somebody's like health and their ability to just be a thriving individual, right? We have these things called the social determinants of health that the government tracks, and all the things that contribute to a person's overall health, education, your employment, housing, etc. But food always became clear to me that it intersected all those different places. Even when you think about the Black Panthers, right, from their history of having the breakfast program, that was a direct correlation to children's abilities to be able to perform even within education. It was linked to being able to have like just access to consistent, healthy meals. And it's something the government still does to this day, right? In public school systems. So that was a long-winded answer, but that was what slowly led. I started gardening also in between there during the pandemic. I met this wonderful Jewish lady in her like 70s. Her name was Amy. Shout out to her. And she just took me under her wing and we just started spending a lot of time together gardening. And so then around 2021, I knew I was about to inherit my family land in 2 years. I decided that I was going to quit my job working for the government and just pursue farming full time and never look back. I started working as a farmhand at a Black-owned farm, and I also worked as a farm educator as well at another farm located near Howard.
That's incredible. Thank you for that background. It really kind of helps us to understand who you are and how you came to this place. And I think one thing I'm even noting is, in a way, that tension between education and farming. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that from their own families. So how did you navigate that family dynamic within your own family, especially once you got to the point of getting that land and having to make such a big shift?
I would be lying and remiss if I didn't say it's still something that we are actively engaged in, or I am actively engaged in with my family. Again, to give more background, so my grandfather was born in 1917, meaning my uncle was born in the 40s. Just to give you an idea, my dad was born in the 60s. So there's a 20-year age gap between my father and his brother. They are two completely different generations. So I feel like it's always important to mention, like, my parents are extremely supportive, both of them, and have been since I decided to pursue this. My, I would say, older family and the family that actually has land, because we were lucky enough that, again, my uncle did go to Howard as well. He was the first one in our family. And this was, again, back in the 60s. And so I believe it was my uncle's idea in collaboration with my grandfather's to put the land into a trust, because we have family land that's actually right next to where I live. The other family land that I'm currently stewarding, we have land that we lost that's right next to it because of heiress property issues. So that already was something that had happened in our family. So I believe that my uncle was really a major part of what allowed us to keep the land. However, my uncle, again, is of that generation that went to Howard, that left the farm, that left these spaces so that they could pursue higher education, get better jobs. My grandfather was able to provide a lot for our family, but I would be lying if I didn't say that a part of that came from having to sell parts of the land. And my grandfather had an 8th grade education. He was extremely smart. That did limit what you would consider his career opportunities. I want to say career-wise, he was a truck driver for a bakery for a long time, in addition to farming the land, but it was more homestead. He did do some U-pick things. With my uncle having that as his memory and recollection, I think that was somewhat of the tension. And then it's funny and ironic that you mentioned the tension between education specifically, because my uncle works in academia, and so does my oldest cousin, his daughter. They both worked for Howard. My cousin still works for Howard. My uncle has retired, but that was his last job, was working through the ranks and eventually becoming, I believe, assistant to the president before he officially retired. And so, again, even me pursuing film was like when I said that and wanted to, again, go to Howard as a legacy kid. My uncle, all his children, my dad, my aunt. So it was just like, you want to do what? But I was able to pursue a successful career. So they were able to eventually come along. And I think my dad has also always been a really big part of that as well, being my background cheerleader. So it was just a slow process. It was repetitive. I started coming to the land and driving from Georgia to DC, because I was at a point where I was moving back and forth, because I lived in DC for a really long time after graduating from Howard. But I would go to visit my uncle and just talk to him about the things I wanted to do. There was a lot of, what are you doing? This is unformed ideas, like full disclosure. I think when I first had an idea of coming here, it was going to be like a bed and breakfast. I hadn't started farming yet or even really truly tapping into gardening. Yeah, I did this completely left field. And he was like, huh? But one of the things that grounded me, and I think I've learned it from being someone who got to spend so much time with my elders and still does, is I had to learn to be patient. And I had to learn to make it more of a conversation with my uncle. It's less constantly trying to impose my will and what I wanted, and being more patient, trying to meet him in the middle, also just trying to reach him as a person. And then weaving in the education, the science behind it, the different things that I was doing, and the different intersection points that were happening. Again, the first farm that I worked at was ironically behind Howard, and one of our board members happened to be my cousin's childhood friend, my cousin being my uncle's son. So it was just little things like that kept happening. I did a lecture at Howard when I was working for that farm, for their engineering department. And so just constantly being able to continue to have a conversation and make it more of a conversation was a big part of what I think helped ease that tension and help to build the validity behind what I'm doing. And it's still, like I said, a conversation, but that there was a level to which I had to slow down and humble myself.
Yeah, 200 years of family history is incredible. And hearing the ways that you guys are still navigating some of these challenges, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the land.
So the land is a part of or let me backtrack, my apologies. The land is located in Florence community. And Florence is a part of Jamestown, North Carolina, and more people would be familiar with High Point, North Carolina. And the land I am specifically on is a part of what used to be a plantation. I believe it was called the Richardson Plantation. And it was my great-grandmother, I believe, Priscilla Brown, that was freed from slavery on this land and would have stewarded this land for quite some time. And through the history of this area being founded by Quakers, and that's a part of why I mentioned Jamestown more specifically, High Point, is if you look up the history of this community, it was founded by Quakers. So there is very few documented accounts of participation in the Underground Railroad, but also participation in helping transfer land to Black folks. So there was a story that I grew up hearing from my uncles and father, and then eventually once I moved here, even confirming with some of the community members, some of them also being the white folks, descendants of the Quakers who have lived here for also hundreds of years as well. My neighbor actually immediately across the street from me, his house was built in the 1800s by one of his great uncles. And so they've confirmed that they believe this land had to be first purchased after, right, the plantation was shut down and the land transferred to a white-led developer. Other white people had to purchase land before Black folks could end up buying it. And so that was confirmed. That was the case with my grandfather as well, that he had to have almost like an intermediate. But then he was able to acquire about over maybe 20 acres-ish in this part of High Point and Jamestown, Florence community in the 40s, the late 40s. The house wasn't built until the early 50s, but he acquired it in the 40s, and we have kept it through 3 generations now. So my grandfather has been passed down to my uncle as an intermediary, as a trustee of the trust that I am the beneficiary of. And so, and though my grandfather acquired this specific tract in the 40s, what I think is beautiful is right next to this land is a gravel road, like a driveway between my property and the church. It's the AME church, so Turner's Chapel AME church. And that church actually was built by the community members. My great great-grandfather being one of them. He put a lien on his house to help build the church. And then the story goes, his son, my great uncle, was the first person buried, or sorry, maybe even great uncle, I'm forgetting, but his son basically passed when he was a child. And he was adamant. He didn't want his son buried at the white man's church. He was like, no, I want him buried here. And so that was actually what led to the graveyard being next to the church. My great-grandparents, multiple sets of great-grandparents, and my grandparents, most of my uncles, my great-aunts and uncles, all buried at that church. Next to that is Lawrence Elementary School, one of the most successful schools in the county. But historically, it was, again, Black school in the area. And it was one of the Rosenwald schools. Rosenwald was friends with Booker T. Washington. Education was important to him. His background was in architecture, so he contributed and donated these architectural plans to have schools built in Black communities for Black children. But the caveat was that the communities had to source like the labor and the materials. So that, again, is what happened here. The community members, Black members and white members as well. Because there's an article that actually my grandfather is recollecting when the school was built, but also when it was integrated, because my father's kindergarten class was the first year it was integrated. And in recalling that, he mentioned that everyone in the community, because again, remember, it was mixed. It was Quakers, and Quakers here were buying Black folks as slaves, but raising them as free people and even helping give them skills and trades to be sent on these caravans that eventually created freedmen's territories out in Indiana and Ohio. This community helped build that school. But it existed since the early 20s. My grandmother and most of her siblings went there, and several generations of my family have attended that school. My farm now in this new iteration will be partnering with those two institutions to contribute to both as part of the legacy of this land and the history of this community.
I imagine it's very special for you to be on that land and steward it every day, knowing that history. Thank you for sharing that with us. On our last episode, we heard from Dr. Meeks how older generations need to support younger people and exchange knowledge, even when they don't quite understand what they're doing. What does this mean to you and your family, particularly around your family land?
I represent multiple sides, and I think young folks, and nobody really wants to hear that, of having to be humble and just ground yourself and making it more of a conversation and a collaboration. And that was something I was encouraged to do. There was this beautiful farmer located in Utah, Alabama. We were at an Afro-ecology encounter in Maryland. I was talking about just my struggles with my uncle. And this farmer is a little bit older than me. And she just asked me one day, have you ever bothered to ask your uncle what he envisioned for the land? He helped put it in a trust, protecting it up until it gets down to you. Have you ever bothered to ask him? And I had to be honest. I was like, no, I haven't. And it was just one of the most sobering moments, but it really, I think, was one of the most pivotal moments that changed the nature of the conversation. I'm extremely supported by my family. I have a double cousin. A lot of people have never heard of that prior to meeting my family members. But he's in his 90s. He grew up with my grandfather stewarding this land. His family has been here equally as long. There are several families similar to mine that have been here for hundreds of years. His tractor is actually sitting right behind my house because he came and tilled up the land. And it was funny when you mentioned them not fully understanding. He said, I don't always understand what you're doing, but I just want to respect what you want to do. If you tell me you need something, I'm here to do it. He constantly affirms me, lets me borrow tools, equipment, whatever I need. I've had elders from the church because I'm located next to it, so they'll see me outside working. I've had elders bring me food, and they're offered to come cook meals, especially to help give back to the community. I have so many people that want to support because they understand what it means for the community, the legacy of having been here for such a long time. It's a memory of joy, empowerment, care, and resilience, and how much this community has thrived. It's ironic because there's a lot of development here now and gentrification, but it's, again, funny in a way because this community wasn't suffering. It was actually always able to thrive in its own way. And so that's been a beautiful aspect of what I get to experience here. And even through my work, working for SBFCLF, the Southern Black Farmers Community-Led Fund. I get to be nurtured by my elders all the time. I began my tenure at SBFCLF as an admin administrator, and admin and operations manager. Through my work with Kolu, our fund manager and founder, with the co-chairs, Alcy and Terrence, with all of our fund advisors, I was built up to a point where they were like, we trust you to steward this. We understand the importance of our young folks doing this. They affirmed me. One of my co-chairs said, you're doing a good job. I was like, wow, I really needed that. He's like, do you need that more often? I can do that for you. And I was like, oh, this is just so beautiful. I show up with patience, humility. I listen a lot. I value what they bring, their knowledge, their wisdom. I'm dedicated to moving the work forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The mutual respect and support is really pivotal, especially in this work. And I know you mentioned your work with the Southern Black Farmers Community-Led Funds. What does your day-to-day look like balancing farm work with management at the fund?
It looks a little crazy because I'm extremely passionate about both things. So I am continuing to find balance of adding in moments of rest and self-care. Honestly, it looks like on hot days, working in the morning, coming in the afternoon to send some emails, and going back out in the evening to cool off. It looks like having to trust community members, be patient, be slow. So much of young folks' energy is rapid fire. I'm here to get stuff done. It's a beautiful, activating energy. I'm also an Aries, so I get it. I love it. However, I am constantly and consistently being reminded and learning that you have to slow down, being able to ground in, taking things slowly, building my infrastructure, not trying to hyper pursue markets because it's just me for the most part. Just being really practical and tactile with my energy and effort. Also, being able to show up for SBFCLF allows me to advocate for myself in a way. That's one of the reasons that I was even put in this position, is that I am a farmer. I am a member of several of the organizations that make up the governing body of the fund. That allows me a level of insight and understanding of the landscape, the need, and what's happening very literally on the ground. It looks like a combination of farming and attending conferences and being on panels.
How do you see your film background influencing your agricultural work?
I see my film background influencing my agricultural work as a storyteller. When we're talking about Black land stewardship, storytelling is a big part of that. So much of Black culture historically has revolved around our stories and passing them down. It's how we become cultural bearers. We are able to document and capture those moments, those rituals, those practices. But it's also a way of, again, helping very literally visualize the narrative, the story. It becomes so much more tangible and tactile in this digital world when people can see it. Everybody is not going to Epps, Alabama to go kick it at the Federation's annual gathering. Everybody is not going to different parts of the South. A lot of folks are scared. I even have friends who are from Georgia, Atlanta, more specifically, right? So that is a little bit different. But hear me say Mississippi and they're like, oh, be safe. And I'm like, no, y'all, wait, time out. I'm going to Black family ancestral land. That hits different. Being able to utilize the gift of film and documentation and storytelling influences how I show up in this work, both on the land, the practices I seek to keep here, how I think through the documentation of the transition of this land, why it's important, not just from a business standpoint, but also as the cultural bearer and keeper of this land, right? I'm also working with the Historic Society here to, again, contribute a Black voice, the families here, to the conversation around the history of this land, to visualize it, to help make it real and tangible. And I can start with the picture, with the video, with the soundtrack, with the recording.
Looking forward, what are you hoping to see in terms of Black farmers and land stewardship?
I would love to see more Black farmers that are rooted in legacy and history, more collaboration with our elders, more opportunities for intergenerational land stewardship. And that requires a level of patience and listening on both sides. I think it's important that as a young person, I've stated the importance of like my generation and young folks being patient and listening, but there's also the reminder of all of my experiences with elders also come with a level of, as you stated, mutual respect and listening and patience on their end as well, even if they didn't agree or understand, just believing in me and validating what I had to bring to the table. I want more of that, right? More of bringing everyone to the table. Also, the visibility of the South. I would be remiss if I left this conversation and didn't say that. Because I got to start my farm journey in the DMV, my mom is from New York. Her father is from Jamaica. I'm a combination of both. I had felt and experienced the erasure of the Southern experience and contribution as anything other than an antiquity. It's always mentioned as history. Everybody fled, everybody left. We created new lives up north and Midwest. Now we don't have land. We're the landless farmers. Actually, there's a long history here. I'm not the only one. I get to say fifth generation, but I know a young woman, Miss Erin from Footprints in the Garden, who is a seventh generation farmer on her family land, right? And so here in North Carolina, and so I just think it's important to uplift that narrative. And as my friend and mentor, Miss Alcy Parks, likes to say, visibilize the South. There's so much history. There's so much legacy. There's so much wisdom, but also there's so many people still there that are have been doing that work and are important in the overall story and movement of Black farmers and land stewardship, because that's where it began and it never ended there. But we're also the ones that are on the front lines in terms of climate justice and the different things that happen, right? Think Katrina, think Helene, think all of these different things that have happened. We're on the front lines. We're also the front lines in terms of contributing so much to our communities to the point where we are the only reason that the community thrives, right? Even the example I gave about the history of the community where I live, that is a lot of history of folks in the South and peri-rural and urban, this history of having to take care of each other and being the only ones that were and still are.
So I'm hearing intergenerational land stewardship, visibility, legacy, collaboration, justice. I love and appreciate all of those things that you mentioned. And as we start to wrap up, our last question would be if you had any advice for young Black individuals who may be interested in farming but aren't quite sure where to start.
I think I would start with honestly unpacking what does farming actually mean and look like to you. There are so many spaces where folks can intersect with farming. Part of my history included being a program manager, currently fund manager. I get to film our different grantees and travel and document the narrative behind the impact of what we're doing. And so it was just, I feel like it's important to understand, do you actually want to be the person that is on the ground, hands in the soil, or show up in a different way? Can you do both? Farming is hard work. So many people said that to me when I first started, and I was like, no, it really is. Waking up, breathing this every day, knowing there is no true break, and loving it and being committed to it. It's a marriage in a way. Folks need to be clear about what they want to do when they say they're interested in farming. Think about the natural gifts you bring. Filming was my gift, and I was able to contribute that to my community and to Black land stewardship and agrarianism, right? So think about what contributions can you make to continue the legacy and the movement.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of BRAIDEd. I'm Keionna Thomas with the EcoWomanist Institute Southeast. EWISE has some exciting announcements. We've officially closed applications for BRAID, the Black Restorative Agriculture Incubation and Development, and have begun reviewing applications. We thank everyone who has applied to be a part of the cohort, reached out to inquire about supporting the program, and the EY's team for their amazing work throughout the recruiting process. We are so incredibly impressed with every applicant and cannot wait to learn more about each of them. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. This has been BRAIDEd, weaving connections, cultivating justice, harvesting change.